Good evening from Los Angeles. I'm Chris Hayes. As we head into the new year and the new Republican Congress, one key fact remains true. Donald Trump remains the single most powerful man in the Republican Party. It is true he is at the lowest ebb of his political influence, following a string of high-profile losses that were directly his fault. But he is nevertheless still the de facto leader of the conservative House Republican Conference. And Trump wields that power over his party despite holding no official office. Instead, he has right-wing podcasts and, of course, his knockoff Twitter platform. But the actual Republican leader, the elected official who wields real power, is, of course, Kevin McCarthy, currently the Republican leader in the House. And in less than a month, when Republicans formally take control of that chamber, McCarthy expects to and desperately wants to become Speaker of the House, which is a huge deal. Very important, powerful job. There are, though, two things that remain unclear. First, we don't know if McCarthy actually has enough support from his fellow Republicans to do so. And second, we have no idea what his or any other Republican's actual, tangible governing agenda would really look like. Now, on that first point, McCarthy really is trapped by his own colleagues. I don't envy him. It was always clear McCarthy would face some token opposition from the fringes of his party, people like Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, for whom practically no one would be conservative or radical enough to earn his support for Speaker, save perhaps Donald Trump himself. That was an idea he and others were floating a while back. But what McCarthy was not expecting was for his margin of victory to be quite so small.
If we win 18 seats, that's equal to 1994. If we win 33 seats, that could be the largest in like 90-some years. I'm really looking at what is that final number? Can we get a strong enough majority that we can govern strongly? I'll make this one prediction. We're going to win the majority, and it's not going to be a 5-seat majority.
Oof. So close on that two-leg parlay there. It's right that they won the majority, but it now looks like McCarthy will probably have exactly a 5-seat majority when all is said and done. So now the party's fringes, like Matt Gaetz, and there's a lot of them, Bob Good of Virginia, dozens of them, wield an enormous amount of leverage. They are part of what has become known as the Never Kevin caucus. Kevin McCarthy needs 218 votes to be elected Speaker during next month's official election. He's expected to have a House caucus, a majority of 222 House Republicans, meaning he will not be able to survive more than a handful of defectors from his own party, just 4, in fact. Now, if McCarthy does not get enough votes, then the vote would automatically proceed to a second ballot. And were that to happen, it would be the first time that's happened during a Speaker's vote in a century. Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona, the former head of the far-right House Freedom Caucus and another Never Kevin Republican, has already announced that he will be challenging McCarthy for the speakership from the right.
I call upon Representative McCarthy to count his votes and understand he doesn't have the votes. Step aside, let other people come forward, and let's get this done so that we can go forward on January 3rd in a more orderly fashion. But you know what? People say, oh, it's going to be chaotic. You know what? That may work now and then to have a little bit of chaos, a little bit of discussion, a little bit of self-reflection that requires some turmoil.
Well, it may be unlikely that Biggs will emerge from the chaos he's calling for a speaker. In fact, as you hear him there, he doesn't even seem to think that's a possibility. He just wants to stop Kevin, hence Never Kevin. There is absolutely an appetite for the MAGA fringe to use their leverage to block McCarthy's ascendancy.
Now, you do realize that if Kevin ends up being Speaker after all, you'll be on the committee to monitor the quality of Girl Scout cookies for the rest of your term in Congress. So there may be a price to be paid.
Well, look, apostling ain't easy. Sometimes you got to get in the fight. This slim majority was disappointing to many, but it may give us an opportunity that even a large majority wouldn't have presented to actually upset the apple cart, to drain the swamp, and to not trust the biggest alligators there to do it.
A lot of metaphors there, but the basic thrust is clear, right? Narrow majority, more leverage for the Matt Gaetz of the world. So the threat McCarthy is facing on one side comes from Gaetz and Biggs and the others. Now, on the other side are the more moderate members of his conference. They generally support McCarthy for now, but they also want to avoid a lengthy floor fight, and they also don't want to see McCarthy make a million concessions to the MAGA folks who may prove their ruin as they stand for re-election in Biden districts in an electoral presidential year. So some are willing to team up with some Democrats on a compromise pick of a more moderate speaker.
If we're going to have multiple votes for Leader McCarthy, and as long as he wants to stay in the fight, we're going to support him. But if at some point these 5 or 6 people will not give in and not be part of the team, well, we're not going to be held hostage by them and cave to their desire. And they're like 2% or 3%, of the conference. So I will work across the aisle to find a Republican that we can mutually agree to.
So that's the threat from the other wing, right? You've got Gates and Biggs making their threat. You've got Bacon and others making their threat that, look, if you try to steamroll this vote and stop McCarthy from being elected speaker, we'll go to the Democrats, right? Because the whole House votes, and we'll find a compromise pick. So McCarthy, in the middle of this, finds himself in a pretty difficult position, stuck between a far-right fringe that loathes him and a more moderate wing of the party that likes him but is willing to throw him under the bus if it means not appeasing the hardliners. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, McCarthy does become speaker, which is still, I would say, the most probable outcome by quite a bit. Then he's got to run things with a Republican conference that will be positively ungovernable with the current majorities. The MAGA fringes, beholden to Donald Trump, don't want to govern, in fact. Really, they're political nihilists, agents of chaos. They will happily tear down the institution of Congress before they're willing to compromise. And here's the reality. The House of Representatives doesn't have to do all that much proactively. It doesn't want to. It doesn't have to pass a bunch of pieces of legislation like this last House did. But there are a few very important actions that Congress must take, like, for instance, electing a Speaker of the House or funding the government, right? Raising the debt ceiling. The funding the government one is pretty important. And we're already seeing this dynamic play out in real time. Because right now, as I'm speaking to you, Congress is debating whether or not to pass a bill to keep the government funded through next September. In the lame duck session, that would be before McCarthy's gang of political arsonists take over the House. And say what you will about Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell, he has shown he generally has a vested interest in getting that kind of basic stuff done. And that's because he actually does have a governing vision for the Republican Party. He's not a nihilist. It's a really bad vision, appointing conservative judges, redistributing wealth upwards towards the richest Americans, doing what K Street and corporate America want. But it's essentially a coherent ideology, or at least a set of operating principles on whose half he's wielding power. And the people on whose behalf he's wielding power, corporations, wealthy Americans, special interest groups, generally would prefer that the government not shut down. So this really interesting dynamic has appeared, where Kevin McCarthy's desperately trying to keep that right flank happy by right now coming out against the so-called omnibus government funding bill.
Are you talking to Mitch McConnell about this? Because, I mean, he's so smart in so many ways, did all the great judges. But this omnibus thing takes away your power for 10 months. You will have no effect on these critical issues. Zero.
We're 28 days away from Republicans having the gavel. We would be stronger in every negotiation. So any Republican that's out there trying to work with them is wrong.
So that
Why
includes
wouldn't you
Mitch
wait
McConnell?
with the hand
Does that include McConnell?
Yes. Why would you want to work on anything if we have the gavel inside Congress?
You just
we
won
have a
the
stronger.
House.
Yes. Wait till we're in charge.
Okay. You really got to appreciate that performance here when you know the context, right? This is the best part. Listen to me here. McCarthy's out there lobbying against funding the government for another 10 months. It's crazy. We're about to have the gavel. But here's the secret. He very obviously wants the omnibus bill to pass because that would relieve the pressure from him. He won't have to be the guy responsible for getting it through the new Congress. He won't have to be the one to deliver the votes to keep the government funded or risk a shutdown with a caucus that doesn't want to vote for anything. The very basic reality McCarthy is going to have to face next year on a spending bill or some other must-pass piece of legislation is the very same one that has tripped up every other Republican Speaker of the House going back to the Obama years. He will have to choose between giving into his own side, caving to the demands of the fringe, increasing the large fringe, holding the government hostage, hurting his own political ambitions along the way, not to mention the political prospects of the Republican Party writ large, or working with the Democrats to secure the votes he needs to keep the government functioning. He can make some concessions in exchange for Democratic support for, say, an omnibus spending bill. But that, in turn, if he does that, will make him even less acceptable to his own party's fringe that already sees him as an establishment sellout. And they keep going through this over and over again, right? This is the conundrum. This is the thing that makes the Matt Gaetzes so infuriated. They don't want anything to pass. It is truly an impossible situation. There is no way out of this. Such an impossible situation that it led to the retirements of Republican Speaker John Boehner in 2015 and Republican Speaker Paul Ryan in 2019 at the tender age of 48. We are left with the inarguable reality that the worst thing for a MAGA Republican Party in this day and age is actually having to govern. Because it makes all the internal contradictions, all the trolling, the political nihilism no longer theoretical.